All right. Well, here we are. We're live. This is working. My name is Connor. I'm in Pittsburgh. Excuse me. I do not have the coronavirus, but I am coughing. There was like a kind of weird mold thing going on with the humidity this week. It felt very much south of the Mason-Dixon line, not north of the Mason-Dixon line. So, a little bit of a cough, but I think I'm through it. This is a bit of an unusual setup from my usual drawing streams, and that's because it is unusual. I am going to be doing a kind of combination video of a bunch of different things. It's a bit of an unboxing video, if you're familiar with that genre of YouTube, in that my good friend sent me a whole bunch of things in boxes, and I will be revealing them to you all slowly over time. Not all of them, but sort of some of them. And it'll also be a bit of an exploration of a potential kind of role-playing game environment or kind of imagination area, which I'm going to call Mythic Pittsburgh, or Mythic America, Mythic pre-colonial America. So I guess I'll just jump in. So the impetus for this, well, I live in Pittsburgh and I think about history a lot, so that's like a big long-term impetus. The specific impetus for this is that my friend Tom Barbalay, sent me a whole bunch of miniatures as well as a whole bunch of books. And I've been trying to figure out what all these new pieces of lead mean to me, and how they kind of fit into what I'm about and what I'm doing, and how I'm going to enjoy these little figurines, these small wars. I guess a little background for people who have never done any kind of miniature stuff, and here, this is some French voyageurs. They might actually be military men, but they may just be. Oh yeah, they look kind of military. They have a good military dress. That's not in focus too well. So he's kneeling in a canoe. You can see his sandals back here. Shaky hands. So this is not focusing well. But here these guys are in a canoe. Come on up a little gridded out creek here. Well, these are two things that Tom sent me, and these are French voyageurs, and they have come to America. These are miniatures that he acquired from someone else, and they acquired from someone else, and they acquired from someone else, and now I have them. These voyageurs live along with a bunch of other miniatures in this Harbor Freight box, and you can kind of see I have them taken out, and each one has the tag from the plastic bags that these were previously in, and then the miniatures themselves with some foam backing so that they have a little bit of safety so they don't get too chewed up. So Tom sent me all kinds of miniatures, missionaries, British grenadiers, marching. There they are. A bunch of gentlemen. Very cool. And these guys aren't painted, that's okay. I have played a lot of games with unpainted miniatures. I don't always paint mine. Everyone gets to kind of enjoy their hobbies the way they want to enjoy them. That's what I say. So, you know, we have the French, we have the British here, and there's a part of American history which is not super well documented because we didn't do documents great. I mean, we did, but we also didn't bother to record the histories of the people that we were taking over and whose land we were displacing them from. So there's a certain amount, there's a quality to early American history where the people who are authoring it really don't have the full picture because it was kind of before the science of them having the full picture, and also just the pressures of empire kind of demanded that morally they shouldn't have the full picture, because to have the full moral picture would mean not killing off the indigenous American population, not despoiling this continent the way that we did as Europeans, as the French here and British here seem intent on doing to this kind of Dungeons and Dragons map. So, what is to be thought about this? What is to be done? I've long thought about a kind of Dungeons and Dragons setting, a role-playing game setting, that takes place in a Pittsburgh with myth, or that takes place in an America with myth returned to the land. That is to say, if there are ancient land spirits, they're back. If European people brought gods of the old world down to America and are recontextualizing them, they're back. If you've read Neil Stephenson's American Gods, this is the general premise of the books, though Stevenson doesn't actually really ever address Jesus, which is an interesting part of American religious history. So it's interesting that, well, I won't say it's interesting, that's a weasel word. I'll say that it is an easier path to just not address Christianity at all in those books. And, you know, I mean, like, fair enough, he wrote super bestsellers, so he gets to make the rules. You know, my rules aren't really rules, they're just feelings I feel. So that's all right. My rules about writing, anyway. I'm not going to talk to Neil Gaiman out of school. You know, he's the beloved author. In any case, yeah, so kind of a supernatural America style. And in that case, what the British and the French are arriving with, and now I'm starting to think in terms of game mechanics, because what I would like is for America to have been a fight on even footing. Or I guess what I'd like to explore with these miniatures that Tom sent me is the idea of the founding of America on an even footing where when those civilizations clashed, and certainly as native peoples, the Lenape, and the Iroquois, and many others start to arrive, and also as the peasantry of Europe, you know, the trappers and traders, the missionaries, you know, everybody's starting to fight over what they perceive to be this place of incredible value, which the world still perceives to be a place of incredible value. So from the 1750s to about the 1820s is where I'm imagining this is going to be set. And that works pretty well. These are Napoleonic and pre-Napoleonic British grenadiers. These French voyageurs are, you know, canoe. They're right in line for this age of exploration of a continent that had already been explored and settled by many, many empires before the European empires arrived. And to that end, let's maybe kind of dig into this idea a little bit. This is where the podcast is going to transition a bit into thinking about kind of my rules are better. So here we are with the Hudson River School. Why do I bring this up? Well, the Hudson River School was a school of American painting that was all landscape painting, and it took its inspiration from the Hudson River Valley, which at the time was a little bit settled. You can see houses on the hillside over here, and you can see this guy kind of looking out on them, but that's maybe not. This is a fantastical foreground, I believe. A view of two lakes and mountain house, Catskill Mountains, 1844. And so these are contemporaneous images. You know, this would definitely be the book cover for the campaign, Among the Sierra Nevada Mountains, 1868, Smithsonian Art Museum. You know, so a kind of exploration of a wild America that the British and the French and the Spanish and all of the European powers kind of failed to actually conquer and civilize, quote, civilize, unquote. So the Hudson River School depicts a vision of the American wilderness which isn't quite realistic. This land was managed for a couple thousand years. The Clovis people date back to between 19,000 years ago and 11,000 years ago, and that's about 50 miles south of Pittsburgh, the Clovis site. And that's continuous inhabitation of that site all the way back. It was basically like a hunting camp that was used for a couple thousand years. And the trash heap goes all the way back down to those ancient times. So when that land wasn't maintained for 2 centuries or so, because the diseases of the Western world had ravaged those populations, because settlement of the East Coast had caused population pressures, right? As white settlers took land, tribes had to push further west, and that meant their neighbors had to look a little further west for food, and that meant that their neighbors had to look a little bit west for food. And so even though there were tribes that had never encountered Europeans, they were still feeling the effects of the pressure that European settlement was putting on where the native populations were choosing to settle. So what these artists are actually showing is the forest after it lost the management of like a tribe that was using it as a hunting ground. So the underbrush wasn't being burned out on a pretty regular annual cycle. The deer weren't being followed. The populations of plants and animals had no controls over them whatsoever. And so nature just exploded. All of the kind of carbon banking that these old growth forests had done, especially when they were under management, when the old trees were being promoted actively and the underbrush was being burned out so that it could be turned into nutrients for the old trees, rather than allow it to grow up and dominate and take over. It was kept clear. Some of the diaries from Jamestown, and this is 150 years before the Hudson River School, which describe land that native populations were maintaining, describe that you could take a horse at full gallop, which is 30, 40 miles an hour. I think. I don't know how fast horses go. I think they could actually maybe move faster than that. Through these woods, because they were open. They were as open as fields were. And so what the Hudson River Valley or what the Hudson River School depicts, is it depicts what happens to those woods when they lose management for 100 years and then get kind of developed, but only as big country manor homes for rich people, and also maybe a little bit of small habitation, and then they start to get industrialized, but this is kind of pre-industrialization. So what you're seeing is in America, what they were seeing when they were painting these, and what you're seeing in these images is an America that actually is a little more real than real, right? Like, the unspoiled American wilderness that these pictures describe and suggest is not what it really was. What we're looking at is a total crazy jungle of like 100-year-long, as they say in Men in Black, intergalactic kegger. As Rip Torn says, we're not having an intergalactic kegger here. Well, certainly the trees and animals of North America were absolutely having an intergalactic kegger for 100 years. They were just munching through all of the old-growth forest and running riot with all of this kind of crazy overgrowth, this super verdant aspect of the land, which was mismanagement and which disappeared as soon as we kind of turned it into farmland and cut all the trees down and used them for lumber and ship masts and all of those things. This was already an environment that had gone through a huge bust, and then in terms of a very long bust in terms of much of the carbon going into the older trees in the forest, and very little new plants getting to start again because the forest was being managed in this way, that the sort of bushes and thorns and vines were kind of kept at bay, and the undergrowth was more like grass and small ferns than it was big tangles of young trees, which gives you these beautiful views like this. So this was actually a land that was fundamentally in crisis, both because the population that had shepherded it for 20,000 years was getting wiped off the map, killed or displaced or killed by disease, or neglected or kind of integrated into society, whether they wanted to or not, civilized, as it were. And so even this is kind of a false, like a fake news American dream in one way or another. This describes an America that only existed as an image. It wasn't a forest that was as healthy looking as this is. This is like a false health. This is how this forest feels at the end of a long, long century of bacchanal, And so this is the landscape, the kind of mythic landscape that is being encountered by all of these European folks, some of whom were part of the aristocracy, some of whom felt themselves to be kind of the inheritors of the Roman Empire, the Greek city-states. They thought that they were continuing civilization in a way that was pretty fundamental. And there were other folks who thought that they were just trying to find a new place to settle because the English had wrecked their island, for the example of the Irish. That reminds me just a little bit of, this is from Roman City, David McCullough.
Like having the Romans here. When I was your age, I fought the Romans. But that was the past. We have to look to the future.
This is hundreds of years before, but
the future
thousands, but this kind of early Celtic culture
Did you hear me, cave enthusiasts?
The Druids.
Romans spanned the sacred river. Now they are destroying our way of life. All of our gods are angry. We must never forget what has been done to us.
Oh. Right. So this is part of a PBS special called Roman City, which is all about the Roman Empire building a notional city in the British Isles, describing the architecture that went into building the city, as well as the politics surrounding the city, and kind of how the Romans did or didn't deal with the local population there. Why do I bring this up? Well, because the Druidic culture that is kind of displayed ostentatiously and garishly there is a culture that a lot of the European peasantry was bringing with it to America. It was, you didn't have to go very far into the hills of County Kerry to find people who believed that the oak was a most important tree, that it was holy, that it was sacred and healing, and that healing black liquid could be drawn from the most ancient of oaks and applied to wounds. It turns out that there's kind of a tannic acid that will drip off of certain kinds of lichen on really old oaks that works perfectly on healing wounds. It's a very effective chemical agent. And so there were folks arriving in America who had this kind of knowledge of the woods that was on par with the kind of knowledge of the woods that the indigenous cultures had, though it wasn't their woods, it was a new and different woods, but it was kind of a, I guess I'm equating a certain level of existential respect for nature between certain sets of Native Americans and certain immigrant populations who took to the frontiers really well. And I'm not the first person to do that. This, yeah, I don't know if you can see this. God, okay. Ramp Hollow, The Ordeal of Appalachia by Stephen Stahl is a pretty intense book, as it may sound. Ramp Hollow is located just outside of Morgantown, West Virginia, and he uses it as a framing device to discuss the larger Appalachian region, as well as kind of work his way through what it is about this place that kind of made. There's a nexus of place and people and character that is Appalachian, and this book takes 300 academic pages, almost 400 academic pages, to tease that apart. In any case, I'm going to read from it just a little bit. No other son of the southern mountains commanded more cultural gravity than Daniel Boone. He was born in 1734 on the Pennsylvania frontier, soldiering from the British Empire during the French and Indian War, and arriving in Kentucky in 1767. He moved in and out of the region over the next decade, hunting and trapping for a living, fighting and negotiating with Shawnee and Delaware. In 1775, a North Carolina judge and merchant hired Boone to blaze a trail into central Kentucky, so he was 41. It became known as the Wilderness Road. Boone established Boonesboro as its northern terminus on the Kentucky River and brought his family there. Boone became famous during his lifetime, but few among the Eastern elite spoke a good word about him. about anyone else who lived in the same places and in the same way that he did. John Murray, fourth heir of Dunmore and the last British governor of Virginia, considered mountain people, quote, dangerous to administrative order. Quote, he said, they acquire no attachment to place, wandering about seems engrafted in their nature. A group of squatters went so far as to promulgate their own laws, sneered Dunmore, nearly declaring themselves, quote, a separate state, distinct from and independent of His Majesty's authority. Goes on to describe more kind of British opinions of the settlers, and goes on to say, there were, wrote J. Hector St. John de Crevecoeur, a kind of forlorn hope. This is the Wilderness Outliers. The French-born author of Letters from an American Farmer scorned, if he did not outright fear them, along, quote, our extended line of frontiers, many families exhibit the most hideous parts of our society. In this view, no one who preferred hunting to farming could be relied upon as a civilizing force. So that's kind of a dire pronouncement. A couple pages later, they're describing how politicians of the 1830s and 1840s praised these pioneers, a word that originally referred to an advanced infantry of laborers who prepared for the regular army by digging fortifications and repairing roads. Representative Charles Faulkner of Western Virginia promoted them. Our native, substantial, independent yeomanry constitute our pride, efficiency, and strength. They are our defense in war, our ornaments in peace, and no population, I will venture to affirm, upon the face of the globe is more distinguished for an elevated love of freedom, for morality, virtue, frugality, and independence than the Virginia peasantry west of the Blue Ridge. Senator Thomas Hart Benton of Missouri spoke of them in world historical terms. He thought of them as the vanguard of the Caucasian race. Civilization or extinction, he says, has become the fate of all people who have found themselves in the track of the advancing whites. That is intense pressure on these guys, these two guys here, and on this guy here, right? They've come to this place that has land that they feel is available to them, that has resources they feel that they can take for themselves, which was not true in their previous era. And though they are citizens, they may not at all have the same motives as this government, or especially not just the kind of native sons colonial British Guard, the children of the American-born children of British parents, who were part of the British society at the time, but also just straight up, assuming that the American colony was not pacified by any stretch of the imagination, you can assume that these more Napoleonic War era, official regiments of the British Army will arrive on our shores and wreak havoc. And so what this is starting to look like, especially when you add in kind of supernatural creatures that are of the land and which come to the aid or not, right? Maybe they're allied over here because the French have special friends and secret hermetic places that cause the Shah of all fire serpents to lend some of these water snakes around, or what have you. Perhaps the British have taken on a demon king. Or with the Scottish people of the High Moors comes a Scottish troll that they wow, he's a very big troll. It's kind of off camera there. Right, I mean, they're used to smuggling things across borders. Why not smuggle a troll? You know? Even just having to, perhaps that's a Dungeons and Dragons adventure there. It's just escorting a troll illegally across the border so that it can be sold at market in Montreal. The Irish may bring down the Fierbold. You know, who knows what kind of Black Forest German mushrooms may sprout on the American landscape. What other kind of magic can start to occur as the peasantry of Europe arrives in these mountains that have not lost their mysterious, wild, magical wilderness. Mountains which, to jump back to the screen here, this can be a campaign map, and you wonder, who drew this campaign map? You know, what Dungeons and Dragons player made this? Looking at the Ohio River, Fort Duquesne, the Monongahela River. Well, this was George Washington's map, 1753, accompanied his journal to the Ohio, 1754. George Washington himself drew this map while he was working for the British Army and scouting the French and Indian fort here and trying to establish trade with the folks up in Butler County and even further north up into Lake Erie. And here you can even see the beginning of Prescott Isle, Maybe Island, a sort of sandbar island that is what shelters part of Erie's harbor. North, west, south. What a campaign map. You know, George Washington drew it, and it's mostly empty, you know. These rivers are here, the Allegheny Mountains are here. Kind of him going up the Potomac and then crossing the mountains and then going along and then making it all the way to Lake Unity. But this is 500 miles of territory for your players in this Mythic America campaign to explore. And when you get to Fort Pitt itself, Fort Duquesne and Fort Pitt, as the various different British and French and eventually American troops took over the point here at the corner of the Allegheny River and the Monongahela River, where they form a confluence and become the Ohio River. This fort was defensible in a number of different ways. This was the oldest fort, the star-shaped fort here, and it was the second one. And, there's a lot of detail to dig into, but it seems like a lot of the work is already kind of not done for the Dungeon Master, but certainly you can just pull from real historical sources in order to get an empty campaign map. And you know, George Washington started it, and you guys are going to finish it as a traveling band of, I guess, Scots, Irish, French trapper, half-native missionaries working as a team with a Fierbold, great monstrous giant of fire. Just come here from Ireland to crush and to settle, find a nice place to live. He does not want to become a super weapon working for the British government, nor does he want to become part of the French mad scientists' evil plans and strange Bastille experiments. So, yeah, how long has we been going? We're 40 minutes in. It's incredible. Have I covered everything I want to cover? I don't know that I have. I think that there's some other stuff. I think mostly just that there are, if you'd like to sort of dig in to this, if I was going to propose a reading list for this campaign, I would propose, just push all this so sorry, way off to the side. I would propose this, Tall Tales of the Catskill Mountains, Frank L. Dumond. This is the Cherry Tree Buck, which is a creature of myth. Another story that I really like in here is an encounter with a panther that occurs in the dead of winter. Oh, what a terrifying, displacer beast-looking panther that is. Oh, what a worried, smart hunter. You'll have to get the book to find out how he gets out of that. Arthur C. Parker was of Seneca descent, and in the 20th century he managed to publish a huge amount of Seneca myths and folk tales, working for the SUNY Albany. Had a big SUNY Albany had a big sort of historical department and native culture department, and he was able to do a huge amount of detailing, a huge amount of getting as many legends as he could find down and getting as many sketches and drawings together as he could with the Horned Serpents that lived under the deepest parts of the lakes, all kinds of other stories. The Horned Serpents in particular are interesting. They're kind of a, I sort of already have. The Horned Serpents are a tribe like the Seneca, like the Lenape, but where they live is they live in here, inside this water valley is another valley. Below this hunting ground here, they have their hunting ground down there. And in the same way that there might be a village a little bit up the river, they have villages here, a couple pools down, a couple pools further down. And there's not too much that separates the serpent tribe from the human tribe, except that they're different. These are serpents, and they have their serpent ways. They eat fish, and they have scaly clothing, but they have gods, they have hunting rites, they have young men and women who fall in love, they have princes and princesses, they have chieftains, they have intertribal wars. And so to have a powerful mythological race arriving as even another factor in the campaign to kind of negotiate with, work with, fight against their allies, are very strange to humans, to all humans, regardless of what the politics or imperial pressures are. They're fantasy creatures that are just native to the landscape too. This is their valley as much as it's anybody else's valley. And, well, they can be intense neighbors. Tom sent a number of Osprey books. I'm not saying that these are going to be good inspiration, these specific ones, but I am saying that Osprey, if you don't know about it, they are a super prolific publisher of books, and they cater to people who like military history, and they have produced thousands and thousands of books about military history. Just to turn this sideways, you can kind of see the standard Osprey livery as it's become. Osprey Publishing, Men-at-Arms. And that 110 there really is, this is the 110th volume of the Men-at-Arms series. This is the 169th volume. Many years later, they're up to the 487th volume here with the New Zealand Wars. So, yeah, there's quite a lot of Osprey books, and they all follow this kind of similar format. They're 48 pages or so, they're softbound, and they kind of fill every page, and sometimes they have color in the middle of them, and sometimes they don't, but these are all fascinating. Thank you very much, Tom. This one, I think especially, just imagining kind of like if you had Rome-era Celts in fantastical Native America, mythic Native America, what that would be like. Because I imagine that these guys would be able to defend their land and their home, their new land, their new home, once they have established themselves there, with the same alacrity that they were able to against the Romans. Which, you know, it was the Romans that abandoned the isle. You know, they did not like their English colony. This is another really good book, a big one. This was actually Smithsonian Classics of Anthropology. This was the first publication that the Smithsonian ever produced. And it is a survey of all of the, and when I say all, I mean as many as they could find, all of the ancient mounds and structures and temple arrangements and buildings and any other sign of kind of massive civilizational work that these surveyors could find. Ephraim G. Squire and Edwin B. Hayes, Edwin H. Davis, I don't know why I said B. Hayes. Oh, right, I think I do. Yeah, because I transposed these two letters and then like read this as Hayes, which is, that's not good. That's my brain faking, telling me that I read something when I didn't. I really clearly didn't. That was a confabulation. Where are we? We're up there at the top. Right, so, you get some amazing stuff in here. This is Plate 35, The Great Serpent, Adams County, Ohio. Probably the most extraordinary earthwork thus far discovered at the west is the Great Serpent, of which a faithful delineation is given in the accompanying plan. That's this thing. It is situated on Brush Creek at the point known as the Three Forks, on entry 1014 near the north line of Adams County, Ohio. No plan or description has hitherto been published, nor does the fact of its existence appear to have been known beyond the secluded vicinity in which it occurs. The notice first received by the authors of these researches were exceedingly vague and indefinite and led to a conclusion that it was a work of defense, with bastions at regular intervals, a feature so extraordinary as to induce a visit, which resulted in the discovery here presented. The true character of the work, which is that it was not for defense, that it was a giant ceremonial snake, is apparent on first inspection. It is situated upon a high crescent-formed hill or spur of land rising 150 feet above the level of Brush Creek, which washes its base. The side of the hill next to the stream presents a perpendicular wall of rock, while the other slopes rapidly, though it is not so steep as to preclude cultivation. They go on, they describe the whole thing, and they go on to show other mounds, the alligator, the cross. Those are in Licking County, Ohio, the rock millworks. And the book goes on to also show ornamentation and tools found in these earthenworks, many of which were funerary, many of which were ceremonial, some of which were grand temples in line with astronomical signs and used to keep the seasons in line, keep human beings in line with the seasons. And so this is just a beautiful book that shows all kinds of artifacts and tools and creations which might be available to someone in Mythic America. This especially beautiful line engraving of a pipe. A lot of what's in this book is totally wrong. The science was not great. I mean, they didn't have carbon dating, and they basically suspected that, well, they speculated that the people that they encountered in their present day could not have possibly built all of this stuff, which was totally incorrect. Those folks absolutely did build all that stuff, and they were just empires that peaked before we arrived, or which were burned out by disease before we had a chance to encounter those spaces when they were actually at their full use. Right. So, this kind of big idea that I've been rambling about for an hour now, almost an hour, this is kind of what came out of this really beautiful gift that Tom sent me, of these miniatures and these Osprey books. This is kind of on the list now, on the back burner. It's just a thought of a good, an interesting space for exploration. Kind of what would have happened if America had been settled, founded, conquered, parceled out in the 1750s through 1819 or so. That was when the first steamship launched from Pittsburgh and went as far as Nebraska, and then they basically marched to the Rockies from there. So from 1750 to 1820, let's say, would be the 70-year period where Mythic America would take place, and you would have Native Americans with access to some of the magical power of the overgrown land. You would have European peasantry of a frontiersman bent, not necessarily there to civilize, but there to settle. Not there to be part of the empire, but to flee from it and to establish something new. And those folks might bring a lot of their magic with them, which might not have worked in the old country anymore because the magic of that place is long gone, but works just fine as soon as you hit the Appalachians. And so perhaps there are people on the fringes of society who are rediscovering even more ancient powers, and then against those characters, which clearly seem like the kind of agentic, troublemaking player characters that a role-playing game would have, you could have a sort of standard array of redcoats and smarmy French privateers working for the French government, but without any kind of oversight and responding to just one man, a king. Same thing with the British on that subject, right? I mean, they have a queen, they have a directed goal. Assuming that America has even greater promise and potential as a continent to Europeans once they realize that it's full of a population that is going to fight back and is an empire just as vibrant and capable as theirs, but using a totally different technology system, that of care for the earth and knowledge of the mythical creatures that roam around beside us, and deep understanding of the trees and the forest, and an ability to harness those things in role-playing game, healing potions and extra battle tactics and summoning of allies from nature and druidic wizardry and all of those kinds of things. Fighting the beginning of serious industrialized empire, right? This is the birth of, this is the age where scientific advancement is really starting to hit factory processes, where steel is becoming mass manufacturing of steel with the Bessemer process is on its way. Iron is already being forged in Pittsburgh by this point. And it's a powder keg. There's a lot going on in Mythic America, and a lot of places for a potential campaign to go. I mean, it's a very open map. If all you have is what Washington scouted out in 1753 to go on, right? There's a whole lot of settlements. There's a lot of, there's a Horned Serpent empire underneath the Mississippi Delta, which I feel like no one controls those folks. There's a huge amount of hydraulic power that, just like swim in and be in charge of. So, yeah, with that, I think I'm going to call this a stream. I haven't actually drawn anything, which is interesting, but I believe that I've, in some way, sketched something here. And I hope that I've at least kind of shown you some amount of these figurines. There are other ones. Tom was better than to just send unpainted figurines only. There's beautifully painted, fantastical figurines, but they don't quite fit this video. So yeah, I guess this has been an unboxing of a wonderful gift from my friend Tom, and it's also been potentially kind of a side episode, a bonus episode of My Rules Are Better. I'm not saying that these rules are better, but they could be pretty cool. There's not really rules attached to them, but this does feel like a small squad tactics, engagements in the wilderness kind of battle scenario that could prove really interesting and fun. And there are a lot of alternate history jumping off points that I think this would engender. Being able to fight King George and kill him for America is a pleasure, a distinct, fantastical pleasure. And with that act of regicide, I think I'm going to call this stream quits. I'll be back tomorrow. I'll be probably drawing sketches in a sketchbook rather than sketching rules ideas and narrative ideas in a rambling video. But I hope you found this enjoyable. I certainly have enjoyed the last hour. regardless of how you all feel. Well, all right. Connor out.